Roblox Dig is a simulator, adventure, and RPG all in one. It was a highly anticipated or hyped up game that everybody was looking forward to, and it was doing well on release, but what happened? Let's start off with why Dig was so anticipated. Popular developer Woosley Nate created a game in March of 2024, which would go on to launch his career. On October 5th, 2024, he officially released the game and called it Fish. This game was super unique at the time, originally inspired by his dissatisfaction for repetitive fishing games in Roblox. Woosley Nate aimed to create a simple and calm experience and cozy vibe similar to Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing, reflecting his fishing roots in Nova Scotia. He built Fish in just 4 months, handling the scripting, modeling, and the environments fully by himself, and the game saw quick success, reaching numbers of up to over 500,000 concurrent players and just over 3 billion visits. However, in November of 2024, Nate stepped back to focus on college and other future projects, and that's when Dubig Studios acquired ownership of Fish, and the game went downhill from there. They added things like microtransactions every update, which left players upset because the game was being taken from them from greed, and that's where Dig comes along. Nate began development on his next project along with some other developers from Fish, which would be showcased on April 3rd, 2025 by Carbon Meister, which was the content creator manager at the time for Fish, which drew in a lot of hype for it because he was pulling hundreds of thousands of views. Then Nate began putting out more teasers for it inside of the official Dig Discord server, and after months of silence, the game finally drops on June 28th, 2025. Dig was very similar to Fish. However, instead of fishing rods, you had shovels. Instead of boats, you had cars. Instead of bait, you had magnets. And there was also some very fun new features. The minigame for digging, for example, was different than the Fish minigame. They also added charms, which would give you passives and buffs that allowed you to create interesting and overpowered builds. I personally like this feature. It gave more of an RPG element to the game, which is a big genre that I personally like of games. The map was huge, tons to explore, which vehicles made easier to do. You could also level up to purchase more vehicles, which they would go faster or have better acceleration, allowing you to go from point A to point B even quicker. That way, you could buy things like shovels to dig quicker or better items. There were tons of locations on the map, like a farm, a cave system, a snowy mountain area. You could even take a ferry boat over to a separate island which had a desert, a jungle, and a volcano. And they even introduced going to the moon in their first major update. They also added boss fights to the game, which was a fun multiplayer experience. You would fight the bosses with your friends to earn money, XP, or even some items, including some shovels. The game did have microtransactions, however, it wasn't anywhere near like Fish. You could buy things like totems, which would boost your luck, XP, or boss damage in the area. And the cool part about it was it affected everybody inside of that zone. However, all these totems that you could buy with Robux, you could also get by just completing repeatable quests inside the game, like pizza deliveries or bakery quests. They had some game passes similar to Fish, however, no cosmetics, which was a good thing because that is one thing that players hated with Fish. The game was performing pretty well, both player-wise and even view-wise on YouTube. I actually personally hit my peak live stream viewer count on this game while hosting boss farms with viewers. I had a ton of fun on this game. It reached a peak player count of over 51,000 and over 53 million total visits. However, this would quickly stop as every day after their first major update, the player count just dropped and dropped and dropped. So what happened? What went so wrong? Real quick, if you guys are new around here, I would appreciate it a lot if you would drop a sub to the channel and a like if you are enjoying the video so far. To be honest, I don't 100% have the exact answer to this. However, I'm going to list off some of the things I believe it to be from my personal issues or pet peeves with the game and just overall things the community didn't like. Starting with the smaller things like tedious actions, there were some very annoying things. For example, the hotbar not saving on rejoin. So every time you rejoined the game, you had to refix your hotbar if you wanted important things like your spawn vehicle, your emergency flare, your glider. It's a small thing, but it really does add up on just annoyingness because why am I joining the game reorganizing a bar I shouldn't have to every time? Another thing like buying things like magnet crates, especially, you need to buy a lot of these and you just can't do that quickly because you're restricted to only buying 50 each time, and then you click the buy button, then you enter the menu again and then type in 50 and then click the buy button. It's just super repetitive for no reason. Wait times on the ferry and elevator, I just don't see a point for there to be a 2-minute 30-second wait time for everything, especially in private servers, because you join into a fresh private server, drive over to the cavern in about 10 or 15 seconds, and then you just have to sit and wait for 2.5 minutes for no reason. It's just a waste of time. Some bigger things that are annoying is lag on join. So for some reason, every now and then when I join the game will just fully freeze for a good 20 to 30 seconds while it's loading stuff in, or I'm not entirely sure what it's doing on the back end, but it's just annoying. The game was just poorly optimized, I feel like. I would do live streams where I would spend Robux on totems so that way we could all farm together and grind together to get all these rare items because, you know, the game had this feature which was meant to be utilized. However, if there was more than like like 6 to 7 players inside of that area, it simply just dropped my FPS to like below 30. And it was just annoying to play the digging mini game while you're on low FPS because you couldn't hit the crit hits 100% accurate. Like, it's a multiplayer experience game, and when the multiplayer part of the game is just not fun to play, then it's just going to crucially hurt the games. Driving everywhere was also an annoying thing. Sure, it is fun at first to explore the map, but once you have the map memorized and you do a couple cycles of everything, it gets quite repetitive with such a big map to drive from point A to point B, especially if you're doing things like completing quests where you have to go up the mountain, which requires you to just drive in a giant circle over and over again. If they added something like helicopters, for example, then that would have made it great. Then they added cooldowns to the boss spawns, which was just a setback for multiplayer experience. I understand balance and stuff like that, but I don't get the point of nerfing boss farms when it required a decent amount of coordination to consistently do it. It brought together players to farm, which is always a good thing for a RPG style game like this. Another small thing is adding useless rewards for quests and codes. Like, they had this very long, tedious quest, the Bob quest, where you had to do so much things. It required hours upon hours of work of just doing these random tedious tasks, and then just gave you one random reward that gave you no benefit in the game. Another big thing is that the rarities just don't make sense. There are cases where legendary items will be harder to get than a mythic or a divine being harder to get than a prismatic, which is the rarest rarity in the game apart from secret. It just doesn't make any sense, and it makes it super demotivating if you're grinding, try to get everything in an area. Also, some of the divine items were locked behind getting secret items, which was a little confusing, but essentially there was some secret items that had functionality, like the rift, where you could use this to go to a secret area, to which you can then dig in that secret area to get hidden divine items. And these divine items sold for a lot of money, by the way. It was actually the best money method. Most important thing being the mini game itself for digging. It gets super tedious after you play for a few hours. It feels more like something you have to do rather than want to do, if that makes sense. You need to be paying attention to hit the crits because they're so crucial. When grinding, I like to have a show up on my other monitor, so I don't want to pay 100% attention to the game. However, I'm not able to do that with dig because you have to pay attention to be able to hit the crits, or you'll miss the big items, which just takes away the cozy aspect like Fish had. Lack of updates also didn't really help the game. Like, off launch, they didn't have any updates planned like most games would have. They would have 2 or 3 in the stockpile. The first major update was like 3 to 4 weeks into the game's lifespan. They released 2 updates back to back, which just didn't really add any content, so it just wasn't really a good look for a new game. Like, after their first major update, I had a ton of fun on it, but after I completed it, I kind of just lost enjoyment in the game because I knew that the next major update would be a long time away. They released an update after it, which was the drills update, which had the functionality to be digging while offline like a lot of games do nowadays. However, it had no benefit to being online, which I feel like they should have had something similar to Pet Simulator's daycare system, where if you're online, it multiplies the time, because why would I sit online on the game to use the drill when I could just get offline? You can see the devs clearly lost passion as the player count dipped, as the next update released on the 16th of August, which added 1 new location inside of the caves after 2 full weeks of players waiting for the update. The game currently sits at around 600 players, which obviously is a major drop off from what they're used to. So I honestly don't see them continuing development on this game. However, who knows, they could try to revive it, or will Nate move on to his next project. If you guys are new here, please make sure to drop a sub and like on the video, and in the comment section let me know what you guys think is the reason Dig died.